Welcome to Crimes in the Dark, the channel where the most chilling crimes come to life in the dark. Before sleep catches up with you, like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening to this story from. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let yourself go, because what you are about to hear is real. Case 1. The basement of the house at 23 Maple Street was a place that seemed to have been biding its time in a tragic history. Cement walls stained by years of dampness and dust-covered shelves created an oppressive atmosphere. But that night it became something more sinister. The body of Richard Wexler, a 54-year-old man, was found lying face down on the cold concrete floor. His face was partially covered by an old blanket, as if someone had tried to hide the inevitable. Blood formed a dark pool around his head from a deep wound in the back of his neck. Near his right hand, a rusty hammer lay abandoned, its handle carefully cleaned but with traces of skin adhering to the metal. Next to the body, a crumpled note in scrawled letters read, "You don't deserve forgiveness." The shaky handwriting suggested that whoever wrote it was under intense emotional pressure. On the floor, partial footprints indicated that someone had walked to the back door after the crime, although there was no evidence of forced entry. 54-year-old Richard Wexler was a man known in the neighborhood for his impeccable appearance and reserved demeanor. He worked as a manager of a small insurance company in central Ohio, where he was respected, but not particularly well-liked. Married to Teresa Wexler for 28 years, their relationship had always been complicated. Although they projected an image of family unity, rumors of marital tensions were frequent among close friends. Richard had 2 children, Ethan, his firstborn, and Lila, his youngest. Both maintained distant relationships with him, especially Lila, who felt that her father had never really supported her artistic aspirations. Richard had a history of being controlling and manipulative, especially in financial terms. He was known to deny loans or financial assistance to family and friends, even in times of dire need. However, he was also a deeply religious man, regularly attending the local church and participating in community activities. This duality in his personality left many puzzled when his death was discovered. The detective in charge of the investigation was Alexandra Monroe, who grew up in a small Ohio town, the daughter of a police officer and a librarian. From a young age, she displayed a peculiar combination of keen intuition and an unquenchable thirst for detail, qualities that led her to graduate with honors from the police academy at the age of 24. Throughout his more than 20-year career on the police force, he specialized in complex crimes that other detectives considered too clean. His particular ability to detect minute inconsistencies at crime scenes earned him a legendary reputation in the department. Personally, Monroe is a reserved 47-year-old woman, divorced for a decade. She lives alone in a modest apartment filled with bookshelves crammed with mystery novels and old files that she still peruses in her spare time. She has an unresolved emotional wound related to the death of her father when she was a teenager, which fuels her obsession with finding justice in even the darkest cases. Her working method combines an almost scientific approach with uncommon psychological insight, developed over years of observing both criminals and victims. This unique blend of skills has made her an expert in unraveling crimes that others consider perfect. 52-year-old Teresa Wexler had spent most of her adult life on Maple Street, an address that once seemed like a safe haven, but over the years became a silent prison. Originally from Vermont, Teresa grew up in a working family where appearances always mattered more than hidden truths. From a young age, she learned to be efficient, methodical, and discreet, qualities that led her to excel as an accountant before she married. However, her professional life ended abruptly when Richard Wexler entered her life. He was charismatic, ambitious, and had an aura of confidence that captivated her from the start. What began as a promising romance soon turned into a relationship marked by control and manipulation. When they married, Teresa quit her job to devote herself entirely to her family, following the traditional expectations Richard had set from the beginning. Although she never admitted it publicly, that decision was more imposed than chosen. Over time, Richard assumed the role of sole provider and took full control of the family finances. Teresa had no access to bank accounts or major money decisions, something she justified by saying that it was better that way, or that Richard knew how to handle those things. But behind that facade of devotion and submission, Teresa carried an invisible weight. Years of emotional and financial abuse that had eroded her self-esteem and independence. During interviews with Detective Alexandra Monroe, Teresa revealed details of her relationship with Richard that painted a grim picture. She described how he disapproved of any decision she made without consulting him, from petty expenses to decisions about their children's education. He would always find a way to make her feel insignificant, pointing out her mistakes or minimizing her accomplishments. Arguments about the family's financial future were frequent, and although Teresa tried to reason, Richard always imposed his will with a mixture of cold logic and subtle intimidation. He wasn't mean all the time, she confessed during cross-examination. But when he was, he made you doubt yourself. He made you think maybe you were right to feel guilty. Teresa claimed that on the night of the crime she had been reading in her room, an alibi that at first glance seemed plausible. However, when Detective Monroe reviewed the scene, she noticed that there was no physical evidence to support this version. The book Teresa claimed to have been reading was closed on her nightstand, with no bookmarks or signs of recent use. In addition, one of the neighbors mentioned seeing lights on in various parts of the house during the early morning hours, including the first floor, which contradicted her statement that she had been in her room all night. With no direct witnesses to confirm his exact whereabouts, his alibi was called into question. During the interrogation, Teresa displayed a peculiar combination of calm and nervousness. At times, she spoke with an almost rehearsed clarity, detailing her nightly routine with precision. At others, she avoided looking into the detective's eyes, fiddling with the edge of her shawl as if seeking to distract herself from the weight of the conversation. When asked about her specific movements during the night, Teresa hesitated, explaining that she maybe went downstairs for a moment to get water, but could not remember for certain. This inconsistency raised additional suspicions, especially since no one else in the house could corroborate her account. Despite her fragile appearance and carefully constructed speech, Teresa Wexler was a woman who had learned to survive in a hostile environment. Her personal life was marked by years of sacrifice and resignation, but also by a growing sense of isolation. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that her relationship with Richard was far more complex than it appeared. And although Teresa insisted on her innocence, her inability to provide a verifiable alibi left a shadow of doubt that Detective Monroe could not ignore. 30-year-old Ethan Wexler had spent much of his life under the oppressive shadow of his father, Richard Wexler, a man who exercised absolute control over his family. From financial decisions to personal aspirations, Richard rigidly imposed his rules, leaving little room for independence or error. For Ethan, this dynamic was especially difficult, as his impulsive and rebellious nature constantly clashed with the inflexible structure his father had established. During his teenage years, Ethan was involved in several school fights, something Richard considered an embarrassment to the family. Instead of trying to understand his son, Richard chose to punish him severely, which led to a relationship marked by verbal sparring, long periods of silence, and growing resentment. Over time, Ethan claimed to have changed, but the emotional scars of his childhood remained. Although he worked as a mechanic at a local shop, his real dream was to open his own automotive repair business. He had been saving for years for this project, but when he finally mustered the courage to ask his father for a loan, Richard flatly refused, arguing that the plan was too risky and lacked solid foundations. This refusal not only thwarted Ethan's plans, but deepened his resentment toward Richard, who never seemed to believe in him. When Detective Alexandra Monroe arrived to question him about the night of the crime, Ethan was visibly nervous, although he tried to keep his composure. He explained that he had been working on a car in his garage, repairing an engine that had been acting up. A neighbor confirmed hearing tool noises at approximately 11 p.m., partially supporting his account. However, the neighbor admitted that he could not say how long the noises had lasted, leaving a time gap in his alibi between 11 o'clock at night and 1 o'clock in the morning. During questioning, Ethan spoke openly about his relationship with Richard, admitting that he had always felt he had been compared unfavorably to others. "It never mattered what I did, it was never good enough for him," he said in frustration. He also mentioned that he had tried to stay away from family discussions, focusing on his work and personal projects. Although the loan denial affected him deeply, he assured that it did not mean he wanted to harm his father. Detective Monroe searched Ethan's garage and found corroborating evidence: scattered tools, fresh oil stains, and a disassembled engine. In addition, a record of recent purchases matched the project he claimed to be working on. Although his alibi had fragile moments, there wasn't enough evidence to completely contradict it. In the end, Ethan was left in an ambiguous position within the investigation. His resentment toward Richard was evident, but there was no conclusive evidence linking him directly to the crime. To Detective Monroe, Ethan was a man caught between his past and his future aspirations, someone who may have wanted to free himself from his father's shadow, but had not yet found a way to do so without losing himself in the process. 55-year-old Gregory Henshaw was meticulous and disciplined, qualities that had made him one of the most respected corporate lawyers in his community. Single and childless, Gregory had devoted much of his life to building a solid career in financial law, specializing in resolving commercial disputes and complex legal matters. His reputation was based on his ability to analyze every detail with surgical precision and remain calm under pressure. Although his profession constantly placed him in tense situations, he always found solace in order and structure, something he reflected in both his work and personal life. Gregory was known not only for his professional ability, but also for his close friendship with Richard Wexler, a relationship that dated back more than 20 years. Both men shared a pragmatic worldview and a mutual appreciation for material success. However, that friendship had begun to deteriorate due to a pending legal dispute related to a shared investment. What began as a promising business venture between the two soon became a source of conflict when differences arose over financial management. Gregory felt that Richard had not been completely transparent with certain monetary movements, something he considered a betrayal of his trust. Tension escalated when Gregory threatened to sue Richard if they did not reach a fair settlement. This conflict not only jeopardized their friendship, but also exposed Gregory to significant risks, as his intimate knowledge of Richard's financial affairs made him vulnerable if the case came to public light. When Detective Alexandra Monroe arrived to question him about the night of the crime, Gregory was clear and direct in his statement. He explained that he had been working in his office reviewing documents until after midnight, claiming that this was a common habit given his work lifestyle. His assistant confirmed seeing him in the office at approximately 10 p.m., but admitted that she could not verify whether Gregory had remained there past that time. This time gap left room for doubt, although it was not enough to incriminate him directly. To support his alibi, Gregory provided full access to his office. Detective Monroe thoroughly searched the premises and found corroborating evidence: documents scattered on his desk, recent entries in his notebooks, and digital records of files consulted during the aforementioned hours. In addition, the office computer system recorded activity until 11:45 p.m., which aligned with her testimony. Although his exact whereabouts between 11 a.m. and 1 a.m. remained difficult to fully verify, the evidence accumulated suggested that Gregory had likely been working during that period. During cross-examination, Gregory spoke openly about his relationship with Richard, acknowledging that their friendship had fallen on hard times due to the financial dispute. Richard was a complicated man, Gregory said with a mixture of frustration and resignation. He always knew how to manipulate things to work in his favor, but I never thought it would come to this. He also admitted that he feared the conflict would escalate and jeopardize his professional reputation, although he adamantly denied taking extreme measures to resolve the problem. Despite his meticulousness and apparent innocence, Gregory was left in an ambiguous position within the investigation. His feud with Richard placed him among the suspects, but there was no conclusive evidence linking his actions directly to the crime. To Detective Monroe, Gregory was a man caught between his loyalty to Richard and his instinct for self-preservation, someone who may have desperately wanted to resolve the conflict, but had not yet crossed the line into irreversible acts. In the end, his alibi was largely verified, leaving him in a less compromising position, although his relationship with Richard remained a point of interest in the investigation. On the night of the murder, Teresa Wexler executed her plan with a cool precision that contrasted sharply with the emotional turmoil she had been building up for years. She knew exactly what to do and how to make it look less suspicious, but her obsession with detail failed to completely obscure the truth behind her actions. It all started shortly after 11 o'clock at night, when Richard went down to the basement looking for an important file he needed for an early meeting the next day. Teresa followed him minutes later, pretending she wanted to make sure he didn't overexert himself. In reality, he was carrying the old hammer he had carefully selected days earlier. She knew no one would associate that tool with her. It was part of a set stored in the basement for years, an object Richard barely remembered existed. As Richard bent over a box of documents in search of the file, Teresa seized the moment. With an eerie calmness, she raised the hammer and struck him in the back of the head with enough force to knock him unconscious immediately. She didn't stop there, however. To make sure there was no chance of Richard surviving, she delivered a second, more forceful blow, one that sealed his fate. Blood began to spread rapidly across the floor, forming a dark pool that reflected the brutality of the act. After the crime, Teresa acted quickly to cover up her involvement. She used a cloth to meticulously wipe the hammer handle, removing any visible traces of fingerprints. However, she forgot that small particles of skin could remain attached to the metal, a mistake that would later prove crucial in incriminating her. She then placed the weapon next to the body, making sure it looked like Richard had been attacked during a fight. To reinforce this false narrative, Teresa simulated a fight scene. She moved some nearby boxes, dropping them to the floor as if they had been knocked over during a struggle. She also crumpled up the note she had previously prepared and placed it near Richard's right hand. The note read, "You don't deserve forgiveness," written in his left hand to simulate someone else's handwriting. Although she tried to alter her writing style, certain subtleties, such as the way she crossed the T's or the pressure exerted on the paper, later revealed that it could only have been written by someone accustomed to writing in the usual way, herself. Finally, Teresa returned to her room and tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She sat in her armchair, pretending to read a book while listening to the sounds of the house in silence. Her mind was busy going over every detail of the crime, making sure she hadn't missed anything. But despite her meticulousness, Teresa couldn't keep her nervousness from seeping through during the interrogation. It was then that Detective Monroe noticed the inconsistencies in her version and confronted Teresa with the circumstantial evidence. Finally, under the relentless pressure of the investigation, Teresa confessed, admitting that she had planned the crime for weeks, driven by years of emotional and financial abuse. The case was resolved through a combination of physical evidence, such as fibers from her robe and heroin residue in her salad, along with a psychological analysis that exposed inconsistencies in her testimony. Teresa was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her confession left the town divided. Some saw her as a victim of abuse who had reached her limit, while others considered her a cold manipulator. The crime brought devastating family secrets to light, proving that even seemingly normal families can hide deep tragedies. The community was never the same. Case 2. The macabre discovery occurred in a remote area of the Sonoran Desert, specifically some 50 kilometers south of Hermosillo, the capital of the state of Sonora, Mexico. This region is known for its desolate vastness and unforgiving landscapes, where extreme temperatures and lack of water make it an inhospitable place for anyone. However, it was precisely there, in the middle of that sea of sand and solitude, where the scene of one of the most shocking crimes of recent years was found. It all started when a couple of American tourists, identified as Liam and Ava Reynolds, were hiking in their SUV in the desert. The adventure-loving Reynolds had decided to explore off-the-beaten-path routes, following recommendations from other travelers about the unique landscapes that could be found in the area. As they drove slowly over rough terrain, something caught their attention. A human hand, partially covered by sand, was sticking out of the surface. Horrified, they stopped the vehicle and began to dig carefully. What they found left them both speechless. The body of a woman buried, barely covered by a layer of sand. His hands were bound with black industrial plastic cable, and thick adhesive tape covered his mouth. His face, disfigured by terror, showed an expression of utter panic. His fingernails were chipped and broken, irrefutable evidence that he had struggled desperately to free himself before succumbing to exhaustion or suffocation. The image was devastating, a silent testimony to the woman's final moments of agony. The location of the find was particularly significant. It was located in an area far from any main road, accessible only by off-road vehicles or pickup trucks equipped for difficult terrain. This indicated that the killer not only knew the area well, but also had meticulously planned the crime. Near the body, investigators found fresh tire tracks, which matched the characteristics of a common SUV. They also found a damaged cell phone, possibly accidentally dropped by the killer during his escape. This device contained key messages that provided crucial clues about the abduction and helped identify both the victim and the possible perpetrators. In addition, a small folding shovel was found next to the body, presumably used to bury the victim. This detail revealed that the murderer had acted with premeditation and coldness, carrying with him the necessary tools to commit the act. The isolation of the site and the meticulousness of the crime suggested from the outset that the murder was not an impulsive act, but the result of careful planning. Thus, the case quickly took on an even more chilling dimension, becoming a puzzle for investigators to solve in order to discover who committed this brutal act and why. Amelia Hughes, 34, was a woman whose public life stood in stark contrast to her personal existence. Born into a wealthy Arizona City family, Amelia was orphaned at age 16 after a tragic car accident took her parents' lives. As an only child, she inherited not only the emotional legacy of her parents, but also a considerable fortune that she used to forge her own path in the world. Despite the emotional scars left by her childhood, Amelia found purpose in devoting herself to philanthropic work, becoming a respected and admired figure in charitable circles. Married to Samuel Hughes, a multimillionaire businessman who owned a chain of luxury hotels, Amelia seemed to live a dream life. However, behind the smiles at social events and magazine photographs, their 8-year marriage was fraught with tension. Although they never had children, the two shared an apparent commitment to humanitarian causes, although their personal interests often diverged. Amelia preferred to work directly with marginalized communities, organizing campaigns to provide food, education, and shelter to those who needed it most. Her husband, on the other hand, tended to focus on commercial projects that, while generating employment, were seen by some as opportunities to expand his financial empire. Despite her public reputation as a charismatic and committed woman, Amelia was known among those close to her for being reserved and aloof in her private life. She maintained an intimate circle of friends and avoided talking openly about her emotions or personal conflicts. This attitude fueled rumors about the true nature of her relationship with Samuel, especially when speculation arose about alleged mutual infidelities. However, Amelia always stood firm in public, defending her marriage as a solid and respectful bond. Beyond the rumors and tensions, Amelia found peace in her altruistic work, where she could disconnect from the complexities of her personal life and focus on helping others. Her passing left an irreparable void in the communities she had been so supportive of, as well as in those who knew her as a complex but deeply committed woman for the well-being of others. Detective Matthew Hayes, 42, was a respected professional whose reputation preceded him on every case. Born in Chicago, he grew up in a hard-working family that instilled in him values of fairness and honesty. After graduating with honors in forensic science and criminal law, he joined the Chicago Police Department as a patrol officer. His ability to solve complex cases soon led him to the homicide team, where he earned the nickname the Architect for his meticulous reconstruction of crimes. Matthew combined an analytical approach with supernatural intuition, noted for his patience and ability to connect with witnesses and suspects. When he was assigned to the Amelia Hughes case, he knew he faced a brutal challenge full of secrets. With his notepad in hand and a piercing gaze, Matthew prepared to unravel the mystery and seek justice for the victim, determined to answer the questions that haunted everyone involved. Samuel Hughes, 47, was a man whose life revolved around success and power. Born into a middle-class family in Houston, Texas, Samuel grew up as the oldest of 3 brothers. As a child, he displayed an ambitious and determined character, always leading school projects or taking the lead in family businesses, however small. His father, a modest contractor, taught him the value of hard work, while his mother, a meticulous accountant, instilled in him the importance of financial management. These lessons molded Samuel into an astute and visionary entrepreneur. After graduating with a degree in business administration from the University of Texas, Samuel founded his first company at the age of 25. A small chain of budget motels. Over time, he expanded his business into a prestigious chain of luxury hotels, Hughes Luxury Resorts, present in several major cities in the United States and Mexico. His 2 younger brothers, Thomas and Richard, worked for him in different departments of the company. Although they shared a strong family bond, their relationship was not without tension due to Samuel's domineering nature. Known for his charisma and negotiating skills, Samuel had an imposing presence that inspired admiration and, at times, awe. He was a born leader, but he also had an explosive temper that made him prone to angry outbursts when things didn't go as planned. This, along with rumors of questionable business practices, had put him under the magnifying glass of the authorities on more than one occasion. However, insufficient evidence was never presented to formally charge him, leaving his public reputation intact. When questioned by Detective Matthew Hayes about Amelia's disappearance and subsequent death, Samuel declared that he would do anything to protect her, even if it meant facing his own inner demons. However, Samuel had a solid and irrefutable alibi for the night of the kidnapping. According to his statement, he had attended a charity gala organized by his own company at the luxurious Grand Horizon Hotel, located in the heart of Hermosillo. The event, which brought together businessmen, politicians, and public figures, began at 8 p.m. and lasted well into the early hours of the morning. Dozens of guests confirmed their presence at the gala, including several photographers who captured images of Samuel giving a speech on the importance of philanthropy in the hotel sector. In addition, hotel security records showed that Samuel remained in the building until 2:30 a.m., at which time he left accompanied by his brother Thomas and other close associates. To bolster his alibi, Samuel provided recordings from the hotel's security cameras, as well as consumption invoices during the evening detailing transactions made with his personal card. Detective Hayes verified each of these details and confirmed that Samuel had not left the event at any time. Although his temperament and past remained a cause for suspicion, his innocence in this case appeared to be supported by strong evidence. Diego Ramirez, 38, was a man whose life had taken a radical turn since his professional fall from grace. Born and raised in Hermosillo, Diego grew up in a middle-class family that always encouraged him to excel academically and professionally. From a young age, he showed an aptitude for business and finance, which led him to study business administration at the University of Sonora. His ambition and astuteness quickly made him a promising figure in the business world. His career peaked when he was invited to join Hughes Luxury Resorts as a business partner by Samuel Hughes, with whom he shared an initially friendly relationship. For several years, Diego worked side by side with Samuel, contributing to the company's exponential growth thanks to his innovative financial strategies. However, their partnership began to deteriorate when rumors surfaced about unethical business practices within the department Diego headed. Although Samuel always denied any prior knowledge of these irregularities, he decided to oust Diego from the company following a financial scandal involving embezzlement and conflicts with key investors. This episode not only ruined Diego's professional reputation, but also left him deeply resentful of Samuel, whom he blamed for having destroyed his life. Diego's impulsive and vindictive nature became evident in the months following his dismissal. He began to publicly express his hatred for Samuel, accusing him of deliberately sabotaging his career and marginalizing him from the business world. His criminal record for fraud and extortion, accumulated after trying to regain his status through illegal methods, made him a controversial and suspicious figure. Despite his efforts to rebuild his life, Diego seemed unable to overcome his obsession with Samuel and his desire for revenge. When questioned by Detective Matthew Hayes about the disappearance and subsequent murder of Amelia Hughes, Diego denied any involvement in the crime. According to his statement, he had been at a business meeting in another city during the time of the abduction. However, his alibi proved problematic. He claimed that the meeting had been private and was unable to provide witnesses or documentary evidence to back up his version. This raised immediate suspicions, especially considering her history of aggressive behavior and her conflicted relationship with Samuel. The relationship between Diego and Samuel was marked by a mixture of initial admiration and deep resentment. In their early years as partners, Diego saw Samuel as a mentor and even considered him a close friend. However, after his expulsion from the company, Diego came to see him as the cause of all their failures. This distorted perception fueled his anger and thirst for revenge, although he never articulated how he planned to execute it. To Detective Hayes, Diego represented a disturbing profile, a man with clear motives, a criminal record, and a weak alibi. However, he was also aware that Diego's hatred of Samuel did not necessarily mean he was guilty of Amelia's murder. The investigation continued, but Diego Ramirez remained under an uncomfortable magnifying glass, caught between his troubled past and his grudge-filled present. Mariana Torres, 30, was a woman whose sweet and gentle appearance contrasted with the financial stresses that had been consuming her in recent months. Born in Hermosillo, she grew up in a middle-class family where she was always instilled with the value of hard work and the importance of helping others. From a young age, Mariana showed a special talent for organizing social events, which led her to study public relations at a local university. Her ability to connect with people and her creativity quickly made her stand out in her field. Her professional life took off when she began working as a charity event organizer with Amelia Hughes, with whom she developed a close and trusting relationship. Mariana was more than a collaborator for Amelia. She was her close confidant, someone with whom she shared not only the logistical details of philanthropic campaigns, but also her personal concerns. Although Amelia tended to be reserved in public, Mariana had access to aspects of her private life that few knew about. This closeness made many see them as an inseparable team, although some noted that Mariana seemed emotionally dependent on Amelia, perhaps more so than Amelia imagined. Despite her apparent professional success, Mariana was facing serious financial problems due to a series of bad investments in risky businesses. She had accumulated significant debts with private lenders and banks, which had brought her to the brink of financial ruin. Although she tried to maintain a facade of stability in front of her friends and colleagues who saw her as a responsible and dedicated woman, Mariana was desperate to find a way out of her financial situation. This constant stress began to affect her behavior, making her more anxious and less predictable. When questioned by Detective Matthew Hayes about Amelia's disappearance, Mariana was visibly nervous, although she assured that she had nothing to do with the crime. According to her version, she had spent the night of the kidnapping alone in her apartment, watching movies to distract herself from her worries. However, her alibi proved impossible to verify. There were no witnesses or records that could confirm her whereabouts. The security cameras in her building were out of service that night due to a technical outage, and her cell phone registered no activity during that period. In addition, Mariana admitted that she had not ordered food or interacted with anyone during those hours, leaving her statement without tangible support. To Detective Hayes, Mariana represented a disturbing profile: a woman with serious financial problems, an ambiguous relationship with the victim, and an alibi that could not be corroborated. Although her innocent appearance and clean record made her seem unlikely as a suspect, her personal situation and lack of solid evidence left too many unanswered questions in the case. The murder of Amelia Hughes was a brutal act that arose from a mixture of greed, desperation, and fatal mistakes made by those who planned it. During the investigation, the damaged cell phone found at the crime scene provided key evidence that revealed the true intentions behind the kidnapping. The recovered messages showed conversations between Amelia and Mariana, where the latter demanded large sums of money in exchange for keeping quiet about Amelia's extramarital infidelity. Although it initially appeared to be common blackmail, it was soon discovered that Mariana had gone far beyond simple threats. Mariana, mired in serious financial problems due to bad investments and accumulated debts, saw in Amelia an opportunity to solve her financial difficulties. According to her later confession, she planned the kidnapping as a way to intimidate Amelia and force her to pay the money she needed. However, she did not act alone. To carry out her plan, she hired an accomplice, identified as a common criminal with a criminal record for robbery and extortion. This man, whose name was Archer Whitaker, agreed to participate in the kidnapping in exchange for part of the money Mariana hoped to obtain. The crime began with careful preparation. Mariana used her proximity to Amelia to monitor her movements and choose the right moment to act. On the night of the kidnapping, Archer intercepted Amelia as she was returning alone to her vehicle after a charity event. Using chloroform, he managed to immobilize her without significant resistance, ensuring that she could not alert anyone or leave obvious traces of struggle. Amelia was then transported in an SUV to the Sonoran Desert, specifically to a remote and little-traveled area that Archer knew well. Once there, the original plan was to bury Amelia partially in the sand, leaving her in a state of temporary defenselessness that would generate enough fear to pressure her to pay. However, things went terribly wrong. Javier, acting on his own and possibly fearing identification, decided to bury Amelia completely, covering her with sand up to her neck. This sealed her fate. Although Amelia desperately tried to free herself, the extreme desert conditions, combined with the lack of oxygen and the sedative still in her system, led to her death by asphyxiation. When Mariana was confronted with the evidence gathered during the investigation, including cell phone messages and forensic evidence linking Archer to the crime, she finally confessed. She admitted that she never intended to kill Amelia, but acknowledged that her unbridled ambition and greed led her to commit acts that ended up costing her friend her life. She was devastated to learn that Amelia had died, although that did not mitigate her responsibility for the crime. The trial of Mariana Torres captured public attention not only for the brutality of the crime, but also for the complex emotions it revealed about human nature. Represented by a competent legal team, Mariana faced multiple charges, including kidnapping, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. Although she insisted that she never intended to murder Amelia, her confession and the evidence presented demonstrated that her greed and desperation had set in motion a chain of events that culminated in her friend's death. The testimony of her accomplice, Archer Whitaker, who negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating with authorities, corroborated the details of the crime and exposed Mariana's central role in planning the kidnapping. During the trial, the court heard how Mariana had used her closeness with Amelia to manipulate and blackmail her, exploiting personal secrets to obtain money. Conversations recovered from Amelia's cell phone made it clear that Mariana was willing to do anything to solve her financial problems. However, her attempted intimidation quickly escalated into a fatal act when her accomplice decided to bury Amelia alive, a twist she claimed she neither anticipated nor desired. Despite her expressed remorse at trial, the court determined that her involvement was too significant to absolve her of responsibility. Mariana was eventually convicted of involuntary manslaughter and conspiracy to commit a felony. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole until she served at least 2/3 of her sentence. Archer Whitaker received a 30-year sentence for his direct role in the murder. Both defendants were warned by the judge that their actions had not only destroyed the life of Amelia Hughes, but had also caused irreparable harm to the families and communities impacted by the case. The verdict brought some sense of closure, but the scars remained deep. Samuel Hughes, Amelia's widower, retired from public life after the trial, unable to overcome the loss of his wife. Amelia's story served as a grim reminder of how greed and betrayal can corrupt even the closest relationships, leading to decisions that have devastating and irreversible consequences. Case 3. The victim's body was found in a room on the second floor of the Sigma Kappa sorority residence, an exclusive student organization known not only for its extravagant parties and secret rituals, but also for its strict code of silence. From the outside, everything seemed normal. The lights were off, the hallways were quiet, and an air of stillness enveloped the place. However, when one of the members of the Brotherhood decided to investigate after hours without a response from the room's occupant, what he discovered inside would forever change the perception of that sanctuary of privilege and tradition. The door was locked from the inside, but as we made our way inside, the scene was anything but peaceful. Chaos reigned, a broken lamp scattered in fragments on the floor, furniture in disarray as if it had been dragged around during a desperate struggle. And above all, the inert body of the victim, face down, his hands tied behind his back with a blue nylon rope. The scratch marks on his neck told a story of brutal violence. Near the body, a pillow stained with saliva and blood suggested it had been used to suffocate him, while a handkerchief embroidered with the initials JD lay discarded beside the bed, as if hastily abandoned. In the adjoining bathroom, a smashed cell phone added another layer of mystery. Who was trying to hide something? The atmosphere smelled of alcohol and tobacco, a sign that the room had recently been used for a meeting or celebration. On the desk, several empty bottles of liquor were evidence of an intense evening. The atmosphere was oppressive, charged with secrets yet to be revealed. Whoever had been there that night knew more than they were willing to admit. And although the crime seemed to have been designed to look like a suicide, the details were beginning to weave a much darker and more complex web of questions. Archer Whitaker, 21, was a charismatic and enigmatic young man who stood out for both his personal magnetism and the shadows surrounding his private life. A third-year economics student at Central University, Archer had built a solid reputation among his peers thanks to his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. However, beneath that facade of popularity and confidence, there were family tensions and risky decisions that threatened to crumble his carefully constructed image. The only child of Celeste and Rowan Whitaker, both high school teachers, Archer grew up in a middle-class home that was stable, but full of academic and moral expectations. While his mother was tolerant and supportive of Archer's independent aspirations, his father had always been stricter, demanding discipline and responsibility. Archer's unserious activities within the Sigma Kappa Brotherhood, extravagant parties, late-night rituals, and rumors of clandestine gambling had generated numerous arguments at home, especially with Rowan, who saw these practices as a dangerous distraction to his son's professional future. Despite family tensions, Archer was admired on campus for his intelligence and natural charm. He was known for organizing some of the sorority's most memorable meetings, although rumors also began to circulate about his financial problems. He had reportedly lost significant amounts of money in illegal gambling organized by other Sigma Kappa members, putting him in a vulnerable position to those who controlled these underground circles. Recently, Archer had expressed his intention to leave the Brotherhood, something that caused discomfort among his peers. While many saw him as a born leader, others suspected that his decision was not just out of principle, but because he was trying to escape the financial and emotional pressures that were consuming him. His sudden announcement raised uncomfortable questions. What did Archer really know about the Brotherhood's dark activities? And more importantly, who would be willing to stop him if he decided to talk? Detective Soren Fletcher, 38, was known in the city's police department as a meticulous investigator with an almost infallible intuition. Born in a small upstate rural community, Soren grew up in a hard-working family where his father, a carpenter, and his mother, a nurse, instilled in him the values of hard work and honesty. As a child, he showed a special interest in solving complex problems, which led him to study forensic science before entering the police academy. His career was highlighted not only by his ability to connect seemingly insignificant details, but also by his empathetic approach to victims and their families. Although he had worked on numerous high-profile cases, the murder of Archer Whitaker would be one of the most challenging of his career. When he got the call, Soren was already familiar with the reputation of the Sigma Kappa Brotherhood, whose members were often embroiled in rumors of illegal activities. From the outset, however, this case seemed different. The crime scene, designed to look like a suicide, had disturbing details that suggested something darker. The position of the body, the struggle marks, and the absence of conclusive evidence about how the door was locked from the inside piqued his curiosity. From the first moment at the sorority's residence, Soren immersed himself in the investigation in his characteristic style, observing without prejudice, recording every detail, and talking to everyone involved before forming an opinion. His instincts told him that Sigma Kappa's elite and closed environment concealed dangerous secrets, but he also knew that gaining the trust of its members would not be easy. For the first few days, he pored over forensic evidence, interviewed Archer's colleagues, and reviewed nearby security cameras looking for any inconsistencies. Although some colleagues felt he was spending too much time on the case, Soren knew that every clue, no matter how small, could be key to unraveling the truth behind Archer Whitaker's death. Lucas Morningstar, 23, was a young man whose magnetic personality and natural charisma had made him the undisputed leader of Sigma Kappa Brotherhood. Although he did not officially hold a position within the organization, his influence was undeniable. He was respected by the younger members as a mentor and feared by those who challenged the implicit rules of the group. Lucas had entered Central University to study business administration with the ambition of following in the footsteps of his father, a successful real estate entrepreneur, but his college life was soon overshadowed by his role within the Brotherhood. Since joining Sigma Kappa his sophomore year, Lucas stood out for his ability to organize memorable events and hold the fraternity together under an almost military code of loyalty. However, his devotion to the Brotherhood's reputation had a dark side. Lucas was known to be extremely protective of Sigma Kappa's image, going so far as to take drastic measures when he felt it was in jeopardy. He had accumulated several disciplinary records during his time in college due to violent behavior during sorority events. On one occasion, he was temporarily suspended for starting a fight with a student who had publicly criticized Sigma Kappa activities. These incidents only reinforced his image as someone willing to do whatever it took to protect the group's interests. The relationship between Lucas and Archer Whitaker had always been complex. On the one hand, Lucas admired Archer's intelligence and charisma, seeing him as a valuable asset to the Brotherhood. But on the other, Archer began to pose a threat when he began to express his intention to leave the organization and, according to rumors, to expose the illegal activities occurring within. Clandestine gambling and dangerous initiations were well-kept secrets, and Lucas knew that if these practices came to light, not only would his professional future be in jeopardy, but also the prestige of the entire Brotherhood. For someone as obsessed with control and reputation as Lucas, this was a red line that could not be crossed. When Detective Soren Fletcher arrived to investigate Archer's death, Lucas was one of the first to be questioned. During the interview, he maintained a confident but careful demeanor, answering questions accurately while avoiding revealing more than necessary. He claimed to have been at an off-campus party the night of the crime, an alibi backed up by several sorority members. However, when the detective delved into the details, he noticed a troubling inconsistency. Although several people confirmed seeing him at the party, no one could corroborate his whereabouts after midnight. This gap in his alibi raised doubts about his innocence, especially as forensic evidence began to point inward to the sorority. Despite his apparent confidence, Lucas could not completely hide his nervousness during the interrogation. His defensive posture and calculated answers led Detective Fletcher to consider him a key suspect. For Lucas, the investigation meant not only a legal threat, but also a risk to everything he had built within Sigma Kappa. If the illegal activities came to light, he would not only lose his position of power, but also any chance of redeeming his reputation with his family and future employers. Ultimately, Lucas Morningstar was a man caught between his thirst for control and the consequences of his actions. His obsession with protecting the Brotherhood and his own future had led him to walk a dangerous line, where every decision brought him closer to the abyss. Elise Waverly, 22, was a young woman who had always attracted attention for her delicate beauty and intense personality. Although she was not an official member of the Sigma Kappa sorority, her close relationship with many of its members had earned her a place as an honorary member. Her most significant bond within the sorority circle had been her relationship with Archer Whitaker, a passionate but volatile romance that had lasted nearly a year before falling apart in the midst of a public argument 3 months ago. From the beginning, Elise stood out as possessive and emotionally dependent on Archer. She was known for her explosive temper and inability to handle jealousy, something that had led to numerous strains in their relationship. Even after the breakup, her obsession with him did not diminish. On the contrary, it seemed to have intensified. There were persistent rumors that Elise had harassed others with whom Archer had shown romantic interest, sending them threatening messages or confronting them directly. These behaviors had generated discomfort among sorority members, who saw Elise as a troubled figure but inevitably connected to Archer. When it became known that Archer had begun dating another woman shortly after their separation, speculation about Elise resurfaced with a vengeance. Many believed she may have acted out of anger and jealousy, unable to accept that Archer could move on without her. However, when questioned about the crime by Detective Soren Fletcher, Elise offered a detailed and seemingly candid account of her relationship with Archer and her whereabouts during the night of the murder. During cross-examination, Elise openly admitted that her relationship with Archer had been complicated and full of ups and downs. "We were like fire and gasoline," she said, describing how the two were constantly attracted to and hurting each other. Although she claimed to feel heartbroken after the breakup, she also said she was trying to get over it and focus on her job as a waitress at a nearby bar where sorority members used to gather. According to her, she had been working late that night, although she acknowledged that she left early due to a headache. Her boss confirmed that Elise left the bar around 10:30 p.m., leaving a time gap that was difficult to explain. However, as the investigation continued, an unexpected detail emerged in Elise's favor. A regular customer of the bar who had ordered takeout that night recalled seeing Elise walking through the parking lot just before getting into her car. The woman even mentioned chatting with her briefly while waiting for her order. Later, a security video from a convenience store located just 5 minutes from the bar confirmed that Elise went in there to buy headache medication at 10:45 p.m. The clerk on duty corroborated this information, recalling that she paid cash and had a brief conversation about the weather. In addition, the GPS on Elise's phone showed that she drove directly to her apartment after the store, arriving at 11:10 p.m. This timing matched records from her building, where a security camera captured her entry. Although her initial alibi had troubling gaps, this additional evidence provided a solid timeline that ruled out her involvement in the crime. Despite her history of obsessive jealousy and problematic behavior, Elise Waverly was eventually left off the list of prime suspects. Although her relationship with Archer had been stormy, physical and testimonial evidence showed that she had not been involved in his death. For Detective Fletcher, this meant focusing on other possible culprits within the sorority circle, while Elise continued to deal with the emotional scars of a relationship she never fully healed. Alden Rivers, 24, was the typical young man who went unnoticed in a room full of extroverted personalities, like those who tended to dominate the Sigma Kappa sorority. Quiet, reserved, and always with his head stuck in a book or his computer, Alden didn't exactly fit the stereotype of the average sorority member. However, his close friendship with Archer Whitaker had made him a constant figure in Sigma Kappa's inner circle. Roommates for 2 years, Alden and Archer shared a unique dynamic. While Archer was charismatic and outgoing, Alden acted as his calm and thoughtful counterpoint. Despite their differences, the two complemented each other well, and their relationship had grown stronger over time through long late-night conversations about dreams, fears, and the challenges of college life. However, beneath that serene appearance, Alden kept secrets that were beginning to weigh too heavily on him. His involvement in the illegal gambling organized by other members of the Brotherhood had initially been casual, almost innocent. Small amounts of money and friendly games during social events. But soon, Alden found himself caught in a destructive cycle. His accumulated losses grew rapidly, and by the time he realized it, he was mired in significant debt to some of Sigma Kappa's most influential members. These individuals were not exactly known for their patience, and Alden knew that if he didn't pay up soon, he would face dire consequences. Archer, noticing his friend's emotional deterioration, tried to intervene. On several occasions, he suggested that he give up gambling and seek help, even offering to lend him money to cover part of his debts. However, Alden refused these offers, arguing that he could handle the situation on his own. Some members of the Brotherhood claimed to have heard tense discussions between the two, especially when Archer began pressuring Alden to find a way out before it was too late. For Alden, this insistence was not only uncomfortable, but also dangerous. He feared that Archer might accidentally reveal his situation to other members of the Brotherhood, which could expose him to even harsher reprisals. When Detective Soren Fletcher arrived to investigate Archer's death, Alden was one of the suspects. During questioning, Alden appeared nervous but cooperative. He explained his relationship with Archer in emotional detail, describing how their friendship had been a cornerstone of his college life. However, when asked about his whereabouts on the night of the crime, his alibi proved problematic. He claimed to have been studying in the university library all night, working on a major project for a finance class. According to him, he had arrived around 9 p.m. and had not left until after midnight. The problem arose when the detective reviewed the library security cameras. None of them captured Alden entering or leaving the building. This raised serious questions about his version of events. Had he deliberately lied? Or had he simply forgotten some key detail? The lack of physical evidence to support his testimony placed him in a vulnerable position in the investigation. Although Alden denied any involvement in Archer's death, his complicated relationship with him, his financial problems, and his inconsistent alibi made him a central suspect. For Detective Fletcher, Alden's every word required careful scrutiny, as behind his apparent calmness could hide something much darker. Alden Rivers' confession was the shocking denouement of an investigation that had been plagued by conflicting leads and suspects with flimsy alibis. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Alden finally admitted to being the perpetrator of the murder of his best friend, Archer Whitaker. The crime occurred at a moment of absolute desperation, when his past decisions brought him face to face with the irreversible consequences of his mistakes. According to his testimony, it all started with a heated argument in the room he shared with Archer. That night, Archer had confronted Alden about his illegal gambling and the huge debts he had accumulated. Not only had he scolded him severely for his irresponsibility, but he had also threatened to expose him in front of the Brotherhood's leaders if he did not take immediate action to resolve his situation. To make matters worse, Archer pulled out his phone and began recording the conversation, arguing that he wanted proof of illicit activities within Sigma Kappa, including underground gambling. This was the last straw for Alden, who felt his entire life was about to come crashing down. In a panic, Alden completely lost control. He grabbed the table lamp next to him and hit Archer over the head, knocking him unconscious. Although he had no initial intention of killing him, fear gripped him as he heard muffled moans coming from Archer as he tried to regain consciousness. Fearing he would scream or draw attention to himself, Alden quickly grabbed a nearby pillow and pressed it against his face until he stopped moving. It was an impulsive, brutal, and devastating act, but Alden said he never meant to go that far. After the murder, he tried to cover his tracks. He tied Archer's hands behind his back with blue nylon rope, a common material at sorority-organized sporting events, to make it appear that someone else had attacked him. He also smashed Archer's cell phone in the bathroom, eliminating any chance of the compromising recordings being discovered. His intention was to divert attention to some internal conflict among Sigma Kappa members, or even a possible suicide. The handkerchief embroidered with the initials JD, found next to the body, almost permanently diverted the investigation to James Dylan, another member of the Brotherhood. However, forensic analysis revealed what Alden could not hide. Fingerprints on the rope were a perfect match to his own, and traces of skin under Archer's fingernails confirmed that he had struggled with Alden before he died. This physical evidence was key to dismantling his alibi and proving his guilt. The motive for the crime revolved around Alden's financial and emotional desperation. Illegal gambling had led him to accumulate unsustainable debts, and Archer's insistence on intervening and exposing his situation drove him to commit an irrational act. In his mind, silencing Archer was the only way to protect himself and prevent his reputation and future from being ruined. However, his attempt to cover up the crime only deepened his downfall. Eventually, Alden was arrested and prosecuted for manslaughter. Although his action had been impulsive, the consequences were inevitable. Archer's death left a permanent shadow over the Sigma Kappa Brotherhood, whose corrupt secrets came to light after the investigation. Alden would pay for his mistake with years in prison, carrying with him the burden of having betrayed his best friend at the worst possible time. The Alden Rivers trial was an intense media-heavy process that captured the attention of the university community and beyond. The prosecution presented a number of irrefutable forensic evidence, including fingerprints on the rope used to bind Archer, traces of skin under the victim's fingernails that matched Alden's DNA, and expert testimony that reconstructed the sequence of events based on the injuries and crime scene analysis. In addition, excerpts of previous conversations between Alden and Archer about illegal gambling were exposed, establishing a clear financial and emotional motive. The defense attempted to argue that the crime was a tragic accident, motivated by panic, seeking to reduce the charges to manslaughter. However, the jury found that Alden's deliberate actions, such as tying Archer's hands and destroying his phone, demonstrated premeditation and an attempted cover-up. Ultimately, Alden was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. During his final plea, Alden expressed remorse, stating that he never meant to kill Archer and that he acted under overwhelming pressure. But these words came too late to mitigate the gravity of his actions. The fallout from the case did not end with Alden's conviction. The investigation exposed illegal activities that had occurred within the Sigma Kappa sorority, including clandestine gambling, dangerous rituals, and corrupt practices that compromised the safety and well-being of its members. In the face of public pressure and legal demands, the university took drastic measures. The sorority was permanently disbanded, and several individuals linked to its illegal activities faced academic or legal sanctions. The case also sparked a national debate about the culture of college fraternities and the need for greater institutional oversight. For Archer's family, the sentence was small consolation for the irreparable loss of their loved one. Although justice had been served, the case left deep scars on all involved, reminding the campus community that even the most exclusive circles can hide dark and destructive secrets. Case 4. Silvercrest Lake had always been a haven of tranquility, a liquid mirror reflecting the colors of the sky and the eternal rustle of the surrounding trees. Its beauty was almost magical, a living postcard that attracted artists, nature lovers, and dreamers in search of peace. But that idyllic image crumbled in a matter of hours one cold October morning, when the lake ceased to be a sanctuary and became the scene of a tragedy. It was shortly after dawn when a group of hikers, armed with cameras and a desire to explore, arrived at the trail along the northern shore of the lake. The air smelled of damp leaves and fresh earth, but something broke the harmony of the place. A dark lump floated among the crystal-clear water, barely visible from a distance. At first they thought it might be a log or some object abandoned by the current. However, as they approached, horror hit them like a punch in the stomach. It was a human body. The victim, a young woman, was partially wrapped in an old threadbare blanket, as if someone had tried to conceal her identity, or perhaps her fate, before throwing her into the water. Her light brown hair, now tangled with seaweed, rippled gently with the currents of the lake, while her face, pale and lifeless, showed signs of a brutal bruise on her forehead. He wore a worn gray sweatshirt and tight black pants, clothes that seemed out of place in that natural landscape, as if they belonged to another story, another life. The coroner would later confirm that the cause of death was strangulation. But even before that official ruling, details began to accumulate like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Near where the body was found, investigators found a stainless steel wristwatch, damaged and stopped at 11:47 p.m., as if time itself had frozen at the moment of the crime. They also discovered a lock of blonde hair attached to a nearby branch, presumably pulled out during a desperate struggle. In the front pocket of the victim's sweatshirt, a small folded piece of paper contained a scribbled telephone number. The area around the lake, densely covered by tall, dense trees, seemed designed to protect secrets. There were no casual witnesses or prying eyes that could have caught what happened. However, investigators noticed fresh tire tracks on the dirt path leading to the nearby parking lot, as well as drag marks in the brush connecting the road to the lakeshore. Every detail, every clue, seemed to scream an uncomfortable truth. This had been no accident, no impulsive act. It had been planned, calculated, executed with a coldness that contrasted brutally with the serenity that once defined Silvercrest Lake. Marlo Hartley, 29, was an independent fine artist whose creativity and talent had made her a leading figure in the local art scene. Born and raised in Willow Creek, Marlo was the only child of Eleanor and Lawrence Hartley, a middle-class couple who always supported her inclination for the arts from an early age. Her eclectic and vibrant style quickly captured the public's attention, and her abstract paintings gained recognition in regional exhibitions, taking home several awards that cemented her reputation as one of the area's most promising artists. Despite her professional success, Marlo maintained an extremely private personal life, preferring to spend time alone or in the company of a small group of close friends with whom she shared common interests. Her marriage to Caleb Monroe, a local businessman, had ended abruptly 5 years earlier due to irreconcilable differences. Tensions between the two were exacerbated by Caleb's problems with alcohol, which created an untenable environment for Marlo. After the divorce, she decided to return to Willow Creek to be near her parents, establishing her studio downtown, where she continued to develop her artistic career. In recent months, however, some neighbors noticed subtle changes in her behavior. Several people mentioned seeing her arguing heatedly with an unknown man on different occasions. These confrontations occurred mainly in her study, and always seemed to end with the man leaving visibly upset. The descriptions provided by the witnesses loosely matched: an individual of medium build, blonde hair, and casual dress. However, no one was able to identify him with certainty or determine the exact nature of his relationship with Marlo. These encounters raised questions about what he might have been quietly facing before his tragic fate. The detective assigned to the case was Ronan Keel, a 46-year veteran investigator with more than 2 decades of experience with the Willow Creek Police Department. Originally from a small coastal town, Keel had come to Willow Creek after moving with his family as a teenager. From a young age, he showed a keen interest in solving complex problems, which led him to study criminology at State University before joining the police force. Known for his meticulousness and ability to connect seemingly insignificant details, Keel had an impeccable reputation within the department. His personal life, however, was marked by a certain loneliness. Divorced for 8 years, he maintained a distant relationship with his ex-wife, with whom he shared custody of their teenage daughter, Lila. Although he devoted long hours to his work, he always tried to be there for Lila, even if it meant sacrificing moments of rest. His colleagues often joked about his penchant for crossword puzzles and classic mystery novels, activities he enjoyed during his rare free time. Keel was alerted to the crime at 11:45 p.m. when he received an urgent call from the duty officer informing him of the brutal murder at St. Ignatius Catholic School. Upon arriving at the scene, he was struck by the meticulousness of the scene. Every detail seemed deliberate, as if the killer had wanted to leave a hidden message. He began by inspecting the dean's office, where he immediately noticed the partially burned letter and the drag marks on the carpet. "There's something deeper here," he muttered as he took notes, aware that this case would require all his cunning and patience to unravel the truth behind the tragedy. Jasper Darrow, 34, is a freelance contractor whose personal life has been marked by a series of turbulent relationships and impulsive decisions. Originally from Willow Creek, Jasper grew up in a hard-working family where he learned the construction trade at a young age from his father, who was a carpenter. However, unlike his father, Jasper never settled into steady employment, preferring to work as an independent contractor for greater flexibility in his life. Although skilled in his work, his volatile nature and tendency to avoid financial responsibilities have caused him both personal and professional problems. Her story with Marlo Hartley began shortly after she ended her marriage to Caleb Monroe. At the time, Marlo was emotionally vulnerable, trying to rebuild her life after the divorce. Jasper appeared in her path when she needed help with some repairs in her studio, offering himself not only as a contractor, but also as emotional support. At first, it seemed that the two shared a genuine connection. Jasper admired Marlowe's artistic talent, while she found some comfort in his carefree companionship. However, it soon became clear that their relationship was destined to be complicated. Discussions between them usually revolved around two main topics: money and commitment. Jasper was having trouble managing his finances and expected Marlowe to help him financially in times of crisis, something she flatly rejected. In addition, Jasper struggled with the idea of a future together. He wanted to be with Marlowe, but hated any hint of formality or stability. This led to multiple breakups and reconciliations, a cycle that left Marlowe emotionally exhausted. According to mutual friends, Jasper developed an unhealthy obsession with Marlowe, unable to accept that she could move on without him. Each time she tried to walk away for good, he would look for ways to get involved in her life again, whether it was offering to help with projects in her studio or insinuating himself into conversations with her close friends. When questioned by Detective Ronan Keel about the events of the night of the crime, Jasper claimed to have spent the entire night of October 11th alone in his apartment, watching movies and drinking beer. There were no witnesses to support this account, as he lives alone. However, a review of his streaming account confirmed activity until 2 a.m., approximately the estimated time of death according to the coroner. This detail raised suspicions among investigators, who noted inconsistencies in his behavior during questioning. Jasper appeared nervous and evasive when answering specific questions about his whereabouts prior to that time, raising doubts about his alibi. Despite his insistence on proclaiming innocence, Jasper Darrow remained under surveillance as a prime suspect due to his troubled history with Marlowe and his obvious difficulty in letting her go. His past actions and relentless obsession painted a picture of a desperate man, willing to cross boundaries to maintain some sort of control over the woman he loved, or thought he loved. Quinn Aldridge, 41, is a visual artist whose career has been marked by constant ups and downs and a growing frustration with a lack of recognition. Originally from a small town in the Midwest, Quinn moved to Willow Creek more than a decade ago in hopes of establishing himself as a prominent figure in the contemporary art world. Although his work was technically proficient, it lacked the charisma and originality that characterized other local artists, such as Marlowe Hartley. This made him a household name within the art community, but not exactly a name that resonated outside of local circles. Quinn and Marlowe had shared an exhibition space in a local gallery for several years, occasionally collaborating on joint projects or promoting each other's work. However, this professional relationship was always tinged with tension. Quinn had a reputation for being extremely competitive, unable to accept when other artists received more attention or success than he did. This resentful attitude was recently exacerbated when Marlowe was selected to participate in a major international show, while Quinn was left out of the selection process. According to statements from close colleagues, Quinn reacted bitterly upon hearing the news, making disparaging comments about the jury and suggesting that Marlowe had only been chosen because of favoritism or connections. In addition to her professional envy, Quinn also had a financial conflict with Marlowe. A year ago, she had loaned him a substantial sum of money to help him cover expenses related to a failed exhibition. Despite initial promises to repay the loan, Quinn never kept his word. This issue generated tensions between the two, especially after Marlowe began subtly pressuring him to get at least some of the money back. Witnesses mentioned that Quinn often taunted Marlowe in private, accusing her of being insensitive and concerned only with herself, although these criticisms seemed to be motivated more by her own resentment than by objective facts. When questioned by Detective Ronan Keel, Quinn claimed to have been at a private party hosted by a friend in the next town over on the night of the crime. Several people present confirmed his attendance, but also admitted that Quinn disappeared briefly between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., claiming he needed fresh air. This inconsistency in his alibi caught the attention of investigators, who considered it plausible that Quinn had taken advantage of this time lapse to commit the crime. The combination of his professional envy, financial conflict, and erratic behavior placed him under suspicion. Witnesses mentioned that Quinn had publicly expressed his displeasure with Marlowe weeks before the murder, even hinting that his success was undeserved. These details, along with his brief absence during the party, made Quinn Aldridge one of the prime suspects in the case. His obsession with outdoing Marlowe and his obvious difficulty handling failure painted a picture of a man dangerously consumed by rivalry and resentment. Silas Bray, 50, was a man living on the fringes of mainstream society in an isolated cabin a few miles from Silvercrest Lake. Originally from Willow Creek, Silas had spent much of his life working temporary jobs and avoiding any deep ties to others. His eccentric behavior and tendency to stay away from social interactions made him a mysterious figure within the local community. Always dressed in shabby clothes and covered in mud due to his frequent forays into the nearby woods, Silas had a reputation as an unpredictable loner. What caught the attention of investigators was the testimony of several townspeople who claimed to have seen Silas hanging around Marlo Hartley's studio on multiple occasions. At first, these sightings went unnoticed as mere coincidences, but soon troubling rumors surfaced. According to some witnesses, Silas was not only observing the studio from afar, but also making inappropriate comments about Marlo when they coincided in public spaces. On one occasion, she decided to confront him directly during a community meeting, accusing him of invading her privacy and making her feel uncomfortable. This public confrontation deeply humiliated Silas, who walked away visibly furious while muttering something unintelligible. The conflict escalated further when Marlo decided to report him to local authorities for harassment. Although the police were unable to present sufficient evidence to take legal action against him, Silas interpreted this as an act of personal harassment against him. Friends and neighbors commented that after this incident, his behavior became even more erratic. Some people claimed to have seen him loitering near Marlo's studio again, although they could never confirm his exact intentions. When questioned by Detective Ronan Keel, Silas was evasive and nervous. He provided no solid alibi for the night of the crime, claiming that he had spent hours hunting in the nearby woods. However, he presented no evidence or witnesses to support his version. In addition, he had no hunting equipment or clothing suitable for spending long hours in the cold woods that night, which raised additional doubts among investigators. The lack of a credible alibi, combined with his history of suspicious behavior and his obvious resentment toward Marlo, placed Silas Bray under strong suspicion. There was enough evidence to suggest that he might have acted out of spite after being publicly humiliated, or even to intimidate her and prevent future complaints. His volatile personality and social disconnection made him a dangerous individual, capable of crossing boundaries when he felt threatened or marginalized. The investigation progressed slowly in its first days, marked by the lack of strong leads that could lead directly to the culprit. Detective Ronan Keel meticulously reviewed every detail of the crime scene and analyzed witness statements, but it appeared that the killer had taken precautions to cover his tracks. However, a crucial discovery changed the course of the case: a lock of blonde hair found near Marlo Hartley's body. This small piece of evidence was immediately sent to forensic laboratories for DNA analysis. After several days of waiting, the results revealed something shocking. The lock belonged to Jasper Darrow, Marlo's on-and-off ex-boyfriend. This direct connection between Jasper and the crime scene led investigators to focus all their attention on him. When confronted with this irrefutable evidence, Jasper initially denied being at the lake that night. He argued that someone must have planted the hair to frame him, and claimed to stand by his original alibi. However, his nervousness began to visibly increase in front of the detectives. He stammered inconsistent answers and avoided making eye contact, which confirmed to investigators that he was hiding something. Finally, under intense pressure and after being informed that the DNA left no room for doubt, Jasper collapsed emotionally and confessed his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, that fateful night, he and Marlo had gone to Silvercrest Lake to discuss their complicated relationship. What began as a seemingly civil conversation soon escalated into a heated argument. Jasper admitted that he completely lost control when Marlo revealed to him that she was planning to move in with another man, someone with whom she was starting a new life. In a fit of blind rage, Jasper accidentally hit her during the fight, causing the deep wound on her forehead. Desperate to silence her as she screamed and tried to escape, Jasper proceeded to strangle her until she stopped moving. Terrified by what he had just done, Jasper decided to dispose of the body to cover up his crime. He used an old blanket he had in his vehicle, carefully wrapped Marlo's body and threw it into the lake, naively believing that the water would erase any trace of evidence. However, she made a fatal mistake. During the physical struggle, one of her locks of hair got caught in Marlo's fingernails, probably while she was trying to defend herself. This insignificant detail would end up being the key that would solve the case. The coroner concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation by manual strangulation. The bruises on Marlowe's neck were a perfect match to Jasper's hands, whose physical strength was corroborated by forensic experts based on his muscular build and work history. In addition, the damaged watch found at the crime scene turned out to belong to Marlowe. This finding made it possible to establish the exact time of the murder. The stopped hand indicated that the watch was broken at approximately 11:45 p.m., the time at which the attack occurred. Although Jasper tried to minimize his responsibility during the interrogation, arguing that it had all been an accident and that he never intended to kill Marlowe, the detectives were able to reconstruct the events using both physical evidence and witness testimony. They spoke with mutual friends who confirmed Jasper's obsession with Marlowe and his inability to accept the end of their relationship. These behavioral patterns, combined with the scientific evidence, painted a clear picture. Jasper Darrow was a man dominated by jealousy and resentment, unable to emotionally process the loss of Marlowe. His obsession drove him to commit an irreversible act, blinded by anger and fear of abandonment. The case against Jasper was closed with solid and irrefutable evidence, ensuring that he will face justice for the brutal crime. The Willow Creek community was deeply impacted by the tragedy, remembering Marlowe Hartley not only as a talented artist, but also as a victim of the violence generated by possessive and destructive love. The trial of Jasper Darrow for the murder of Marlowe Hartley shocked Willow Creek, capturing the attention of the community and the media. Evidence presented, including a lock of blonde hair, bruises on Marlowe's neck, and a damaged watch, confirmed his guilt. Testimony highlighted Jasper's obsessive and controlling behavior, evidencing years of emotional manipulation that culminated in lethal violence. Although the defense argued that it was an impulsive act in the midst of an argument, forensic evidence and testimony discredited this version. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Jasper guilty of first-degree murder, receiving life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case left a deep impression on Willow Creek, where many regretted not intervening sooner to help Marlowe. In her memory, an exhibit titled Colors of Resilience was organized, celebrating her art and denouncing toxic relationships. In addition, the case inspired educational campaigns on domestic violence and the creation of local victim support resources. Memorial benches were installed near Silvercrest Lake, accompanied by messages promoting helplines. The tragedy reminded the community of the importance of empathy and action in the face of violence, honoring Marlowe's legacy as a call to protect the fragility of human life. Case 5. The night of the soul is always darkest when the light of virtue is extinguished. At St. Ignatius Catholic School, a bastion of tradition and faith located on the outskirts of Boston, that darkness came without warning, enveloping its Gothic hallways in a shadow that seemed impossible to dispel. For more than a century, the place had been synonymous with discipline and integrity, a haven where education and religious values intertwined to shape generations of young people. But everything changed that fateful night, when the sacred silence was shattered by an act as brutal as it was unexpected. The discovery occurred at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to filter through the fog-stained glass windows of the East Wing. There, in the office of Dean Cornelius Drayton, a scene was found that chilled even the most temperate of hearts. The inert body of the dean lay face down on a weather-worn Persian rug, surrounded by scattered papers and overturned furniture as mute witnesses to a desperate struggle. His head rested in a pool of coagulated blood, the product of a mortal blow delivered with a heavy bronze paperweight, which still remained near his right hand, as if it had been abandoned in a moment of panic. Drag marks on the carpet pointed toward the door, an ominous trail suggesting the presence of another person. Most intriguing, however, was by the window, shards of broken glass mixed with fresh dirt, indicating that someone had entered or escaped through there. It was as if the crime itself had deliberately left clues, playing tricks on those trying to solve it. In the adjacent hallway, Sister Seraphina Quinn was found unconscious, with a deep cut on her forehead and scratches on her hands, as if she had tried to defend herself from something or someone. Although she survived, her memory of the incident remained veiled for days, leaving more questions than answers. Among the evidence collected were fingerprints on the paperweight, brown hair stuck to the carpet, and other clues that would soon become crucial pieces of a puzzle that promised to be as complex as it was revealing. The tranquility of St. Ignatius had been violated, and the entire community was forced to face an uncomfortable truth. Evil could lurk even in the holiest of places. Cornelius Drayton, 58, was a man whose life was marked by a deep devotion to education and religious values. Born in Salem, Massachusetts, he grew up in a deeply Catholic family, where the importance of faith, discipline, and service to others was instilled in him as a child. His father, a deacon in the local church, and his mother, an elementary school teacher, molded his character with unwavering principles that would remain with him throughout his life. From an early age, Cornelius showed a natural inclination toward learning and teaching, fascinated by the great philosophical and ethical questions that challenged human beings. After graduating with a degree in philosophy and theology from the prestigious University of Notre Dame, Cornelius dedicated his career to forming generations of young people within Catholic institutions. His trajectory led him to the position of dean at St. Ignatius Catholic School, a position he held diligently for more than 2 decades. He was known for his firm but fair character, always seeking to maintain high academic and disciplinary standards. Although his strict stance sometimes generated friction with some members of the faculty, Cornelius was widely respected by those who recognized his unwavering commitment to the integral formation of students. For him, education was not only a means of acquiring knowledge but also a path to virtue and personal excellence. In his personal life, Cornelius shared his existence with Eleanor Drayton, a retired former librarian whose calmness contrasted with her husband's intense temperament. Together they raised 3 adult children, each following different paths but imbued with the same values that Cornelius so strongly espoused. Despite the apparent stability of their marriage, recent years had brought new challenges for the family. Failed real estate investments had created financial strains, plunging Cornelius into worries he rarely shared openly. Throughout his career, the dean faced difficult times, including accusations of favoritism in disciplinary proceedings and rumors of legal disputes related to past business dealings. However, Cornelius always tried to remain true to his principles, guided by an unwavering conviction that duty and integrity should prevail over any adversity. His life, though complex, was a testament to dedication to something greater than himself, the formation of young minds and hearts destined to build a better world. Evelyn Cross, a 42-year veteran detective with the Boston Police Department, was known for her thoroughness and ability to solve complex cases. Originally from a small town in Maine, she grew up in a humble family where she learned the value of hard work and honesty. As a child, Evelyn showed a fascination with mysteries, devouring detective novels and eventually studying criminology. Her career began as a field agent, but she quickly rose through the ranks thanks to her ability to connect seemingly insignificant clues and reconstruct complicated scenarios. In her personal life, Evelyn kept to herself and lived alone in a modest apartment in downtown Boston, accompanied only by her cat Mira. Divorced for almost a decade, her marriage ended due to her dedication to her work, although she found satisfaction in the justice she achieved for others. In her spare time, she enjoyed long walks and reading books about the darker aspects of human nature. Her colleagues described her as quiet but intense, with a gaze that seemed capable of reading minds. The murder case at St. Ignatius Catholic School marked a unique challenge. The institution, famous for its strict code of conduct and centuries-old traditions, seemed an unlikely place for such brutality. Upon arrival, Evelyn encountered a Gothic, tension-laden atmosphere. Inside Dean Cornelius Drayton's office, she meticulously examined the scene. A bloodied paperweight, scattered papers, drag marks on the carpet, and shards of glass by the window. Every detail told part of the story, and Evelyn knew she had to put the pieces together. Their investigation began by briefly interviewing witnesses, including Sister Serafina Quinn, who was hospitalized after being injured. Among the evidence collected were fingerprints, hairs, and near the body, a pocket watch marked 2214, the probable time of the crime. Evelyn realized that this case would not only test her skills as an investigator, but also her ability to navigate the deep moral secrets of a community shaken by tragedy. Harrison Whitaker, 46, was a man whose life combined deep intellectual passion with personal and professional frustrations. Originally from Vermont, he grew up in a middle-class family that valued education and traditions. From a young age, Harrison showed an insatiable interest in history, fascinated by the events and figures that had shaped the world. After graduating from the University of Vermont with a degree in history, he decided to devote his career to teaching, convinced that he could inspire new generations to understand and learn from the past. His arrival at St. Ignatius Catholic School 15 years ago was seen as an opportunity to consolidate his professional reputation. However, it soon became clear that his explosive temperament and defiant attitude did not quite fit with the school's institutional rigidity. Although he was a charismatic and passionate teacher in the classroom, his relationship with the administration had always been strained. He openly criticized the strict rules imposed by Dean Cornelius Drayton, whom he considered inflexible and out of sync with the needs of modern students. This friction led him to be seen as an agitator within the school community, someone who questioned tensions between Harrison and Dean Drayton peaked weeks before the crime. According to several witnesses, arguments between the two became more frequent and heated. The main trigger was an internal report that pointed to alleged irregularities in Harrison's grade records. Apparently, some parents had filed complaints about discrepancies in their children's grades, prompting the dean to launch a preliminary investigation. Drayton accused Harrison of manipulating grades to favor certain students, an accusation the professor vehemently denied. To Harrison, these accusations were a direct attack on his professional integrity. During a faculty meeting, he lost his temper and publicly confronted the dean, accusing him of using the allegations as an excuse to get rid of him. According to rumors within the school, Drayton was considering firing Harrison because of these alleged problems, something the professor saw as unfair and devastating to his career. On the night of the crime, when questioned by the police, Harrison claimed to have been dining alone at the Bellinata restaurant between 2100 and 2300 hours. However, his alibi was weak. He ate at a secluded table, paid in cash, and there were no witnesses who could corroborate his version. This gap in his story raised suspicions among investigators, who began to see him as a possible suspect. For many, his volatile temperament and work conflict with the dean provided a troubling context that placed him at the center of the investigation. Harrison Whitaker, a complex and passionate man, now faced not only the collapse of his career, but also the shadow of an accusation that could change his life forever. Vivian Holloway, 39, was a woman whose life revolved around her work as a freelance accountant and her role as the single mother of Ethan Holloway, a troubled teenager who was constantly in trouble at St. Ignatius Catholic School. Vivian had grown up in Brookline, Massachusetts, in a hard-working family where she learned from a young age the value of effort and responsibility. After divorcing her husband nearly a decade earlier, she took on the task of raising Ethan alone while building a stable career as an accountant. Although she was known for her professionalism in the workplace, her personal life was marked by a constant struggle to balance the demands of her job with the emotional and disciplinary needs of her son. Ethan, 15, was described by teachers as an intelligent but defiant student whose disruptive behaviors had made him a disruptive figure in the school. Vivian, although aware of her son's mistakes, felt deep resentment toward Dean Cornelius Drayton, whom she blamed for making Ethan's situation worse rather than helping him. According to her, the repeated suspensions imposed by Drayton not only marginalized Ethan, but also further isolated him, depriving him of opportunities to improve. Vivian argued that the school should offer constructive alternatives, such as counseling programs or extracurricular activities, rather than continually punishing him. This discontent led her to confront the dean on multiple occasions, some of which became intense. Other parents stated that Vivian had verbally threatened Drayton, accusing him of being unfair and inflexible. For many, these confrontations revealed a mixture of maternal frustration and desperation to find a solution for their son. In her daily life, Vivian was a reserved but determined woman, devoted entirely to Ethan's well-being. She lived in a modest home in Brookline, decorated with practical furnishings and family photographs that reflected her desire to keep alive the memory of happier times. Outside of work and frequent visits to school, he enjoyed quiet moments watching television series or reading contemporary novels. Her neighbor, Marcus Dillard, described her as a kind but distant person, someone who seemed to carry an invisible burden. On the night of the crime, Vivian assured investigators that she had been at home watching television throughout the evening. However, her alibi had a weak point. Although her neighbor confirmed having seen her return to her residence at approximately 9:30 p.m., he could not guarantee that she had not gone out again later. This gap in her testimony generated doubts among investigators, who began to consider her as a possible suspect. For many, her deep resentment toward the dean and the verbal threats she had previously made provided a troubling context that placed her under scrutiny. Vivian, a mother caught between frustration and love for her son, now faced questions that would test both her character and her innocence. Jonas Wainwright, 62, was a man of few words whose life was spent in the quiet and routine of the grounds of St. Ignatius Catholic School. With 20 years of service as head groundskeeper, Jonas had devoted much of his life to tending the institution's vast grounds, making them a serene and welcoming space. Although his work was essential to maintaining the school's pristine environment, Jonas had always gone unnoticed by most of the school community. His reserved nature and preference for working quietly made him almost invisible, a gentle shadow who moved among the trees and bushes without drawing attention to himself. However, there was one person with whom Jonas had a cordial relationship: Sister Serafina Quinn. The two shared a connection based on simplicity and mutual respect, occasionally talking about everyday issues or exchanging words of encouragement during their encounters in the hallways or gardens. Despite his apparent modesty, Jonas faced personal difficulties that few knew about. Further investigation revealed that months before the crime, Jonas had borrowed money from Dean Cornelius Drayton to cover urgent medical expenses related to his ailing grandson. The loan, although initially offered with apparent generosity, soon became a source of constant pressure. When Jonas was unable to meet the agreed-upon deadlines for repaying the money, Drayton began to act aggressively, even threatening to sue him for embezzlement if he did not pay immediately. This situation left Jonas distraught and humiliated, aware that his financial stability and reputation were at stake. For him, the dean's demands were not only unfair, but also deeply dehumanizing, considering that the money had been used to save his grandson's life. This conflict marked a turning point in his relationship with Drayton, transforming any trace of gratitude into resentment. In his personal life, Jonas was a man of simple habits. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of Boston with his daughter Lydia and his 5-year-old grandson, who suffered from a chronic illness that required constant care. He spent his free time reading historical novels and working on small carpentry projects, a hobby that allowed him to disconnect from daily worries. Although he was not a fervent religious man, his relationship with Sister Serafina brought him some spiritual comfort, as she used to listen to him patiently when things got complicated. On the night of the crime, Jonas claimed to have been caring for his sick grandson at home, asserting that he had not been out at any time. However, his alibi had a significant gap. His daughter Lydia admitted that Jonas had left briefly around 10 p.m. to buy medication at a nearby pharmacy. Although Lydia backed up her version, this brief lapse without witnesses raised suspicions among investigators. For many, the strained financial relationship between Jonas and the dean, coupled with his late night out, placed him in a vulnerable position in the investigation. Jonas, a quiet, hard-working man, now faced questions that could expose secrets he had tried to keep hidden. After an exhaustive investigation, the case was finally solved thanks to a crucial detail: the forensic analysis of the handkerchief found near the window. DNA tests confirmed that it belonged to Harrison Whitaker, which marked a turning point in the investigation. In addition, security records from the Bella Notte restaurant showed that Whitaker never entered that night, contradicting his initial alibi. This discovery led investigators to confront the professor with the accumulated evidence. When cornered with this irrefutable evidence, Whitaker collapsed emotionally and confessed to the crime. According to his account, he had gone to Dean Cornelius Drayton's office that night with the intention of confronting him about his possible dismissal. Tensions between the two had escalated weeks earlier, when Drayton accused Whitaker of manipulating grades to favor certain students. Although the professor denied these accusations, he knew his career was in jeopardy. That night, driven by desperation and pent-up anger, Whitaker decided to confront the dean in a desperate attempt to save his professional reputation. The murder occurred shortly after 2200 hours. Whitaker entered the main building of St. Ignatius Catholic School, taking advantage of the darkness and silence of the night. He knew that most of the employees would no longer be on campus at that hour, which allowed him to move undetected. Arriving at the dean's office, he knocked on the door and entered after receiving a distracted response from Drayton. Inside, he found the dean reviewing papers on his desk, oblivious to what was about to occur. The discussion began in a tense but restrained manner. Whitaker attempted to reason with Drayton, pleading with him to reconsider his decision to fire him, and arguing that the allegations against him were unfounded. However, the dean remained firm in his stance, accusing Whitaker of acting in bad faith and refusing to back down. It was then that the conversation escalated rapidly. Whitaker, blinded by frustration and a sense of injustice, lost control. In a fit of rage, he grabbed the heavy brass paperweight resting on the desk and struck Drayton in the back of the head with devastating force. The impact was so brutal that the dean fell to the floor immediately, unable to defend himself. Although Whitaker claimed that the attack was not premeditated, some details suggest that he had planned at least part of his actions. For example, the partially burned letter found in the ashtray contained references to an alleged conspiracy against him, indicating that Whitaker had been mulling over how to expose the dean's alleged injustices. Instead of seeking justice, however, his anger led him to commit an irreversible act. After the crime, Whitaker tried to make a quick getaway. Leaving through the front door was too risky, so he opted to escape through the office window, which he had previously left ajar. In his haste, he left behind the handkerchief, a fatal mistake that would later link him directly to the crime scene. Meanwhile, Sister Seraphina Quinn was injured while attempting to casually intervene. While making nightly rounds as part of her usual routine, she heard suspicious noises coming from the hallway adjacent to the office. Alerted by the sound of hurried footsteps and breaking glass, she headed that way, only to find Whitaker trying to escape. Startled, she tried to stop him, but Whitaker pushed her violently, causing a deep cut on her forehead and several scratches on her hands as she tried to protect herself. The nun was left unconscious on the ground, although she was later found and transported to the hospital. The Harrison Whitaker trial was one of the most high-profile in recent Boston history, capturing the attention of both the school community and the general public. During the court proceedings, the prosecution presented a compelling case backed by irrefutable forensic evidence, including DNA analysis of the handkerchief found at the crime scene, records that disproved his alibi, and key testimony from Sister Seraphina Quinn. Although Whitaker attempted to argue that the murder had been an impulsive and unpremeditated act, the evidence pointed to partial planning, as evidenced by the partially burned letter with references to an alleged conspiracy against him. During the trial, Whitaker appeared dejected and remorseful, but his demeanor failed to convince the jury. In his closing statement, he admitted to losing control during the confrontation with Dean Drayton, but reiterated that he never intended to kill him. For the court, however, this argument did not mitigate the seriousness of his actions. The jury deliberated for 3 days before convicting him of first-degree murder. The judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, underscoring the brutality of the crime and the devastating impact it had on the San Ignacio community. The consequences of the case were profound and long-lasting. St. Ignatius Catholic School was scarred by the event, forced to confront not only the loss of a respected leader, but also the internal tensions the crime exposed. Many students and faculty expressed feeling betrayed by Whitaker, who had been seen as a dedicated and passionate educator. His fall from grace served as a grim reminder of how pressure and anger can corrupt even those who seem committed to high values. In memory of Dean Cornelius Drayton, the school established an annual scholarship for outstanding students in ethics and leadership, ensuring that his legacy would continue to inspire new generations. The community worked hard to heal the wounds left by the crime, organizing forums on conflict management and emotional well-being to prevent future tragedies. For Harrison Whitaker, the sentence meant the total collapse of his life. Incarcerated in a maximum security prison, he spent his days reflecting on the decisions that led him to commit an irreversible act. Although some colleagues and alumni expressed some sympathy for his personal situation, most agreed that justice had prevailed. Whitaker's case became a tragic example of how mismanaged ambition and uncontrolled anger can have devastating consequences, leaving indelible scars on all those affected. Case 6. The fire that shook the city early that morning was not a simple accident. Rather, it looked like a macabre work of destruction orchestrated with precision. It all began in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place whose history was tinged with secrets and shadows. With its weather-worn bricks and broken windows like empty eyes, the building was a monument to abandonment and decay. For years, it had been the scene of clandestine activities, a shelter for the homeless, a meeting place for illicit transactions, and even a backdrop for urban mystery stories. But that night, this old silent witness became the epicenter of a tragedy that would leave indelible scars. It was at 3:15 a.m., when a sleepless neighbor noticed an orange glow dancing among the nearby trees. Intrigued and alarmed, he got close enough to discover an apocalyptic scene. Flames were ravenously devouring the interior of the warehouse, soaring skyward as if reaching for the stars. Without wasting a second, he called the fire department. By the time the sirens broke the silence of the night and the emergency units arrived on the scene, it was too late. The fire had reached catastrophic levels, spreading with uncontrollable ferocity. What was once a solid building was now nothing more than a roaring inferno, consuming everything in its path. Inside the charred remains, the rescue teams found 2 charred bodies, mute testimonies of the brutality of that event. One of them belonged to Ivan Kovalenko, a 47-year-old man whose life had been dedicated to fighting just such tragedies. As head of the local fire department, Ivan was known for his bravery and tireless leadership. His body was found near the main entrance, as if he had tried to escape in the last moments of his life. Next to him, but further towards the back of the warehouse, lay Marina Sokolova, a 29-year-old forensic technician, surrounded by fragments of technical equipment scattered on the floor. This detail suggested that Marina was not there by chance. She was working on something important before the flames sealed her fate. But what really froze the blood of the investigators were the clues found in the rubble. Traces of flammable liquids had been strategically placed, proving that the fire was not the work of chance. There was also a silver lighter, partially melted by the heat, with inscriptions that the fire had cruelly erased. And most disturbing of all was the way in which the fire was organized. It followed a sophisticated, almost artistic methodology, as if the fire itself were an instrument manipulated by expert hands. A technique that only someone with previous experience in controlled pyromania could have mastered. That night, the abandoned warehouse was no longer just a forgotten building, but the scene of a crime that promised to defy all expectations. Ivan Kovalenko, 47, was a man whose life revolved around duty, family, and his insatiable curiosity for science. Born in a small industrial town in Eastern Europe, Ivan grew up surrounded by machines and structures that awakened in him an early fascination with engineering and applied physics. As a child, he dreamed of understanding how things worked and how disaster could be prevented. At the age of 20, he left his homeland to emigrate to the United States, where he found his true calling, to be a professional firefighter. Married to Yelena, a kind but firm schoolteacher, Ivan built a strong and loving family. Together, they raised 2 teenage children. Maxim, 16, a passionate basketball player, and Anya, 14, who shared her father's love of books and problem-solving. Their home was always full of laughter, although Ivan was often late after long working days, obsessed with ensuring the safety of his community. As chief of the local fire department, Ivan was admired for his bravery and tireless leadership. He had led complex operations that saved hundreds of lives, earning the respect of colleagues and civilians alike. However, his obsessive meticulousness with safety standards sometimes led to tensions within the team. He tolerated no mistakes or shortcuts, which made him both respected and feared. In recent months, Ivan had been investigating a series of suspicious fires linked to organized crime. He worked closely with outside experts, including Marina Sokolova, a brilliant forensic technician. His dedication to unraveling the truth made him a man beyond reproach, but also someone who did not hesitate to face hidden dangers. He was a man who lived to protect, even when it meant risking everything. Marina Sokolova, 29, was a woman whose life was deeply intertwined with science and the tireless search for truth. The only daughter of Vladimir and Natalia Sokolov, both prominent scholars in the field of natural sciences, Marina grew up in a home where books and experiments were as common as toys for other children. From an early age, she showed an insatiable interest in understanding how the world worked, especially when it came to solving mysteries through logic and analysis. Her passion led her to study forensic chemistry, a discipline that combined her love of science with her desire to contribute to justice. During her university years, she developed exceptional skills in analyzing combustion patterns and reconstructing events based on the traces left by fire. Her unique talent soon made her stand out in her field, making her a highly sought-after independent consultant. She worked with government and private agencies, collaborating closely with experts such as Ivan Kovalenko, head of the local fire department, on complex cases requiring scientific accuracy. Despite her professional success, Marina was a reserved person in her personal life. Single and childless, she dedicated much of her time to her work and to small pleasures such as reading and long walks at dawn. However, in recent months, those who knew her well noticed a change in her. Marina had expressed concern to colleagues about a persistent threat related to one of her clients, although she never disclosed specific details. Close friends commented that she seemed more nervous than usual, avoiding talking openly about certain projects. This unusual behavior left many wondering what she might be facing in silence as she pressed on with her work, determined to unravel the secrets the fire left behind. The detective in charge of the investigation was Sergio Calderon, a 45-year-old man with an impeccable reputation in the police department. Born into a humble family of Latin American immigrants, Sergio grew up in a neighborhood where justice was not always accessible. This motivated him to become a police officer, determined to fight injustice and protect the most vulnerable. Married to Elena, a nurse and the father of 2 young children, Sergio balanced his personal life with an almost obsessive dedication to solving complex cases. His meticulousness and ability to connect seemingly insignificant details had made him one of the most respected detectives. In reviewing the evidence from the fire, Sergius quickly identified the main suspects. Viktor Petrov, whose dispute with Ivan over the warehouse raised a possible financial motive, and Daria Novikova, whose professional and personal conflict with Marina suggested ulterior motives, and Rob Morrow, whose arsonist background made him a suspect. Sergius decided to question each based on their connections to the victims and circumstantial evidence. For him, every detail counted, from traces of flammable liquids to discrepancies in alibis. Viktor Petrov, 52, was a man whose life was marked by professional success and an astute ability to navigate the labyrinths of the business world. Born into a middle-class family in a Midwestern industrial city, Viktor always had a keen instinct for business. From a young age, he showed an interest in commerce and investments, working in small ventures while studying business administration. Over time, he built a real estate empire that made him one of the most influential businessmen in the region. His interests centered on commercial properties, from industrial complexes to logistics centers. Although his public reputation was impeccable, recent financial reports suggested irregularities in some of his transactions, raising suspicions among those who dug into the details. His friendship with Ivan Kovalenko had been strong for years, based on shared projects and a mutual admiration for hard work. But this relationship began to fracture due to a conflict over the warehouse where the fire occurred. Viktor had invested large sums of money in rehabilitating that abandoned building, dreaming of turning it into a modern logistics center that would propel his business into new horizons. For him, this project represented not only an economic opportunity, but also a kind of personal legacy. The problem arose when Ivan Kovalenko, as head of the local fire department, conducted a thorough inspection of the warehouse and determined that it did not meet the required safety standards. Ivan argued that the structure presented significant risks, from electrical failures to structural problems that could endanger human lives. Viktor, upset by these findings, attempted to negotiate and pressure Ivan to reconsider his position. He argued that the repairs needed were minimal, and that delaying the project could cause him millions in losses. However, Ivan stood firm, defending his moral and legal responsibility to ensure public safety. This confrontation quickly escalated into a heated legal dispute that further strained their friendship. During investigations into the fire, Viktor was questioned by the authorities. He claimed to have spent the night of the crime in a hotel outside the city, participating in a business conference. Several people confirmed seeing him there, although there were discrepancies in the exact times. Some witnesses mentioned that they saw him arrive late to the event or be absent for short periods without clear explanation. Viktor, always self-assured, calmly defended his alibi, insisting that he had nothing to do with the fire. However, his calm and calculated demeanor left some investigators wondering if he was hiding something else behind his impeccable facade. Daria Novikova, 36, was an investigative journalist whose career had been built on tirelessly seeking the truth and exposing buried secrets. Born into a working-class family in a port city, Daria always had an inquisitive spirit and a passion for unraveling stories that others preferred to keep hidden. From a young age, she showed an interest in journalism, seeing it as a tool to give voice to the marginalized and challenge established power. Over time, he developed a solid reputation in his field, noted for his ability to connect invisible dots and present powerful narratives. The relationship between Daria and Marina ended abruptly 3 months ago, leaving deep scars on both of them. Professional differences played a key role in their breakup, While Marina prioritized scientific accuracy and confidentiality in her research, Daria was more inclined to publish information quickly, even if it meant exposing incomplete or sensitive data. This clash of philosophies led to heated discussions, where words became weapons and silences became insurmountable walls. In addition, personal tensions related to trust and professional jealousy arose. There was speculation that Daria sought to expose compromising details about Marina's work and her collaboration with Ivan Kovalenko, possibly to advance her journalistic career. Rumors suggested that Marina had threatened to sue her for defamation after discovering that Daria planned to publish a controversial article based on information obtained without her consent. This conflict not only marked the end of their romantic relationship, but also made Daria a central figure during the arson investigations. When questioned, Daria claimed to be covering a public protest in the city center at the time of the crime. Several audiovisual sources supported her statement, although there were discrepancies in the exact times. Witnesses confirmed seeing her at the event, but some recalled her being briefly absent at key moments. Although Daria maintained a calm demeanor during interrogations, her explanations left room for doubt. Rob Morrow, 41, was a man whose life was marked by a destructive obsession: fire. Born in a small Midwestern industrial town, Rob grew up in a difficult environment, surrounded by poverty and family turmoil. From a young age, he exhibited erratic behavior and an unusual fascination with flames. What initially seemed to be just a childish curiosity soon morphed into something much darker. During his teenage years, he began experimenting with small fires, burning abandoned dumpsters and unusable structures. However, his penchant for pyromania quickly escalated into a dangerous pattern. At age 31, Rob was arrested and convicted of starting multiple fires in vacant industrial buildings. What made Rob unique among other arsonists was his technical ability to manipulate flammable materials and create specific fire patterns, almost as if he treated each fire as a work of art. This personal signature to his crimes not only made him a prime target for authorities, but also a fascinating case for forensic investigators. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, during which time his resentment towards those who caught him grew exponentially. During his imprisonment, Rob vowed revenge against all those involved in his arrest. In particular, he harbored a deep hatred for Ivan Kovalenko, who had testified at his trial, providing key details about how Rob operated and the devastating consequences of his actions. Marina Sokolova, a forensic technician specializing in post-fire analysis, was also rumored to have played a crucial role in providing scientific evidence that helped secure his conviction. These figures represented for Rob everything he considered unjust in the system that had locked him up. 6 months before the fire that shook the city, Rob was released on strict parole conditions. Although he tried to keep a low profile, his secretive attitude and criminal record raised suspicions from the beginning. When the fire broke out in the abandoned warehouse, Rob automatically became one of the prime suspects because of his previous experience and his implicit connection to the victims. When questioned, Rob claimed to be at home sleeping during the night of the crime. However, he lived alone and was unable to produce corroborating witnesses. His lack of a solid alibi, combined with his troubled past and the tensions accumulated during his incarceration, placed him squarely under the magnifying glass of the authorities. To Detective Sergio Calderon, Rob was a human puzzle, someone capable of planning an arson with surgical precision, but also a man driven by primal emotions such as rancor and revenge. The central question was whether this time Rob had taken his obsession beyond what he could control, leaving a trail of death and destruction in his wake. After weeks of intensive investigations, Detective Sergio Calderon turned his attention to Rob Morrow as the prime suspect in the deadly fire. Although initially the evidence was insufficient to link him directly to the crime, new evidence emerged when an eyewitness testified that he had seen a tall, burly man, characteristics that matched Rob, hanging around the warehouse hours before the fire. This testimony was crucial, but it was the forensic analysis of the silver lighter found in the rubble that tipped the scales. Partial fingerprints recovered from the object matched Rob's unmistakably, making him the prime suspect. During a thorough interrogation, Rob finally confessed his guilt, revealing chilling details about how he planned and executed the fire. He admitted that he had returned to the world of fire after years of accumulated resentment, feeling betrayed by Ivan Kovalenko and Marina Sokolova, whom he held responsible for ruining his life. His goal was not just revenge, but to send a clear message. No one could humiliate him with impunity. Using techniques refined during his time in prison, he engineered a fire that seemed accidental at first, but would quickly turn into a death trap. The key to solving the case was a partially burned piece of paper found next to Marina's body. Investigators were able to restore it using advanced technology and discovered that it contained preliminary notes written by Rob as he meticulously planned the fire. They detailed precise diagrams of the warehouse, strategic points where to place flammable liquids, and calculations on how the fire would spread. Rob had used a highly volatile mixture of gasoline and oil, creating a cocktail that guaranteed a rapid spread of flames. In addition, he placed small incendiary charges at strategic points within the building, blocking potential exits and ensuring that the victims were trapped with no chance of escape. The result was devastating. The fire consumed everything in its path, maximizing the chaos and minimizing any chance of survival. Rob demonstrated impressive technical mastery, but also calculated ruthlessness. His desire to cause as much damage as possible was reflected in every decision he made that fateful night. For Sergio Calderon, this case underlined a disturbing truth. Behind the apparent beauty of fire, a dark and dangerous mind can always hide. Rob Morrow's trial was one of the most high-profile in the city's recent history. The evidence presented by the prosecutor, including the lighter's fingerprints, the restored piece of paper with his notes, and the eyewitness testimony, built an irrefutable case. Throughout the trial, Rob was impassive, although he occasionally hinted at flashes of arrogance when describing his art with fire. His prior confession definitively sealed his fate. He was convicted of first-degree murder and arson. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, underscoring the premeditated cruelty of the crime and the devastating impact it had on the victims' families and the community. Although the sentence brought some degree of legal closure, the emotional scars remained deep. Yelena Kovalenko, Ivan's widow, struggled to rebuild her life with her teenage children, who lost not only a father but also a local hero. Marina Sokolova's family, meanwhile, remembered a bright young woman whose promising career was brutally cut short. The community was marked by fear and distrust, especially of abandoned places like the warehouse where the tragedy occurred. For many, the case served as a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind the human fascination with fire. Justice was done, but the echo of that fateful night would forever linger in the hearts of those who once called that city home.